Welcome. Let me pause. Welcome. Welcome to the 2023 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Seattle, Washington. I am James Tatehill, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here is a visual description of myself, sometimes referred to as an access check. I am a white male with brown hair and a possibly gray button-up shirt that is not as wrinkle-free as the label led me to believe. Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I am a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with year-round resources, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today. Together, we are AWP. In support of our mission, we would like to welcome Zinnia Hansen, a high school student in Seattle who is part of the Youth Poet Laureate Program, a program of Seattle Arts and Lectures which aims to identify youth writers and leaders committed to poetry, performance, civic and community engagement, education, and equity across the Puget Sound region. Welcome, Zinnia Hansen.
Hello. I'm going to read a poem. I actually had long COVID for my senior year, and that was when I was kind of diving into poetry. And I just found that it was this way to sort of feel something beyond my body. And this is me kind of reflecting on that in a way in this poem. So, Ghazal. In the center of the bud, apocalypse is unfolding. At the edge of myself, pink infinity is unfolding. The gods sit in the garden, peeling the petals of the sun, the spiral road to Damascus. Damascus rose unfolding. The bestial moon is stained orange with the war it wages against the sea, reflected light of a battle unfolding. I want to bury my face in the ruffles of my God's dress like I'm smelling a flower, like Virgin Mary unfolding. There is one good thing to come out of our capital climate emergency, fashion industry, inflation unfolding. I sewed the planet into a couture gown. I stitched her up with fire. Everything burned from the inside out, unfolding. Leonard Cohen is putting Lorca's poetry to music. The two of them are dead and still singing a song unfolding. Now we plant a zinnia. Once all its petals have fallen, it will become a signpost pointing to heaven unfolding. Thank you.
Thank you again, Zinnia Hansen, and thank you again, Seattle Arts and Lectures, for letting that be a part of this event. We are delighted to bring you this event today. Mutant, Monster, Misfit, myself, writing the disabled, chronically ill body. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, which is actually AWP itself. And as a blind writer and member of the AWP board, I am especially grateful for the space AWP continues to make for the subject of disability. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Now, before we start, some brief housekeeping. First, please silence your cell phones, like text messages too. Those count as not silent, says the academic whose students are constantly getting text messages. Please remember no flash photography is allowed during the presentation, please. Please respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors around 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed, and the signing table will be in the hall outside this room. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you notice a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you, and it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Janine Hall-Gailey, who will introduce this fantastic and important event.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I'm incredibly touched. I'm sorry I have a thing with the bright light, so I had to wear my sunglasses for a while, but now I'm switching to readers. All right. Anyway, thank you again. This is Mutant, Monster, Misfit, myself, writing The Disabled and Chronically Ill Body. I'm the moderator, Janine Hall-Gailey, and also a panelist. We also have Paul Guest and Jen Javon joining us remotely, and Rosebud Ben Ani and Sandra Beasley here with us. Welcome to everyone. Mutant, Monster, Misfit, writing The Disabled and Chronically Ill Body. I'll begin with the event description and reading the panelists' bios, ending with Paul Guest, who is joining us remotely. After that, the panelists will be able to give us a short creative statement about their relationship to writing the chronically ill and disabled body and read a short piece of their own creative work. Then we'll dive into questions and answers. So this is 5 disabled and/or chronically ill writers of poetry and memoir and fiction. They talk about how their body influences the way they write, their subject matter, even how it impacts their genres and efforts towards publicity. How do we claim or activate our disability or illness? What do we disclose? We'll discuss how our work has changed over time, how our relationship with disability has changed, how we accommodate or resist the gaze of abled readers, and how disability and illness manifest in genre, line, and metaphor. So my bio is, I am a writer with multiple sclerosis. That's why I have to wear those sunglasses with the lights. It activates all my weird stuff. I also served as the 2nd Poet Laureate of Redmond, Washington. I'm the author of 6 books of poetry, including Field Guide to the End of the World, which won the Moon City Book Prize, and they just came out from BOA Editions, Flare Corona. Pure for Poets is my latest nonfiction book. My poems and essays have appeared in Poetry, American Poetry Review, and Salon. I live in an exurb of Seattle. Sandra Beasley is the author of 4 poetry collections, most recently Made to Explode and Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life, a Disability Memoir. She edited Vinegar and Char, verse from the Southern Foodways Alliance. She lives in Washington, D.C. Rosebud Ben Ani is the author of several collections of poetry, including the amazing Alice James Award-winning If This Is the Age We End Discovery, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. Her work appears in Poetry, APR, Tin House, and Guernica, among others. Her poem, Poet Wrestling with Angels in the Dark, was commissioned by the National September 11th Memorial Museum in NYC. Her video essay, My Judaism is a Wild Unplace, was commissioned by Paramount for a nationwide television campaign. In January 2023, she performed at Carnegie Hall on International Holocaust Memorial Day. Jen Javon, who is joining us remotely. Jen Javon is a Mexican-American indigenous poet and novelist from the Southwest Desert, and the recipient of poetry fellowships from the NEA and the Penn Rosenthal Emerging Voices. Jen is the author of 5 books of poetry, including the most recent Belly to the Brutal from Wesleyan University Press, and the novels Trinity Site, Jubilee, and River Woman, River Demon from Blackstone Press. Her work has appeared in The New Republic, The Nation, Poetry, and Salon, and has won national awards, including the Southwest Book Award, New Ohio's Poetry Prize, Grammar Poetry Prize, and Cutthroat's Joy Harjo Poetry Prize. Paul Guest, who is also joining us remotely. Paul Guest is the author of 4 collections of poetry and a memoir. His work has appeared in Poetry, the Paris Review, New England Review, and numerous other publications. A Guggenheim Fellow and Whiting Award winner, he lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. So before the panelists' questions, we're all going to give a brief introduction to our relationship to writing, the chronically ill or disabled body, and read a short piece of creative work. I thought this was really important for a thing like this because to know the person answering the question, you have to know their work. So it'll be, I guess, I'll go first, and then it'll be Sandra, Jen, Rosebud, and Paul. I think that's the answer. So a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Janine Hall-Gailey. I have MS, a rare bleeding disorder, an immune deficiency, as well as some other fun stuff. I've been writing what's called body horror poetry, think Aliens or Rosemary's Baby, for a while. Flare Corona is my 6th book, and the first in which I directly address my health issues as well as the pandemic. Here's a poem from this newest book from Boa Editions. My life is an accident. My life is an accident of DNA and radiation, a million missed chances for death to sweep me off my feet. Too many of this, not enough of that, a witch's spell for trouble. Red-haired and scarlet-fevered, born with wings and a tail, an immune system weak as a kitten, and a knack for being in the wrong weeds at the wrong time. Fascinated with systems, folders, and fossils, tracking down each dinosaur and later delivery systems for rare antivirals, government research into nuclear facilities, conspiracy theories about aliens and solar flares. I was never meant, not planned, not absorbed into the mainstream, never meant to survive this long, according to charts and scans. She's a miracle, they said. She's a mutant. She's a baby born of a bad seed. Modern living makes a body bitter, our blood and flesh filled with hormone disruptors, flame retardants, and false positives. But I'm a haymaker, a harbinger, a fateful warning of things to come. Thanks. Thank you. So next up is Sandra Beasley.
Yeah. Hi there. I just want to confirm, this is the 5 to 7. No. Yeah, great. I want to thank you for being here, especially on a Saturday afternoon. It is very likely that you're here because you yourself have a relationship with disability or chronic illness, or you are loved by and loved to someone who does. Or maybe you're just here because you recognize that this is not an identity that can or should stay at the margins any longer. And I would thank AWP for hosting this. I would also thank the activists, some of whom are here at this conference, some of whom are not, who helped AWP recognize the importance of us being here. That labor is noticed and appreciated. I think that the best way I can introduce my work is to just in this time articulate my body in relationship to my work. I live with a pervasive and life-threatening bunch of food allergies, including dairy, egg, beef, shrimp, mango, cucumber, soy, some tree nuts, macadamia, pistachio, cashews, so on and so on. I have a disability that is invisible, except when it is highly visible, which is when I'm in an active reaction. You will always see me with my purse. I will always be carrying epinephrine. I will always be carrying Benadryl. And I've had this, as I said, since I was born. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that even though I came into my identity as a writer at a young age, I did not think that my food allergies was something that should come into my writing. I thought, that is not interesting. It's banal, it's too detailed, it's something to be ignored whenever possible.
And so I look back at my early poems, and I know that in some ways I was circling around issues informed by my food allergies, my sense that food, which seemed to bring everyone else together, often kept me apart. But it is not in those early poems, to the point that I look back at my undergraduate workshops. I was in a workshop with someone who had cystic fibrosis, and I know that we were both working through our relationships with disability or the medicalized body, but it's not on the page, and we never talked about it explicitly. I didn't really fully understand what he had experienced until he passed away from it. I moved forward through graduate school and ended up including some allergy girl poems in my first book, Theories of Falling. And when I say allergy girl poems, there's a kind of diminution in that title. And I was writing very directly at these experiences, very episodic, very vulnerable. And I don't particularly love the idea of suffering from food allergies. They inform who I am, but I think it's okay to say that those poems were framed by suffering, by thinking about all the ways in which I felt restricted. So I love those poems, and they're important, but they're biographical, straight from the well, and they're memories. Moving forward, I got, weirdly enough, the opportunity to write a book that was a memoir, doubled as a cultural history of food allergies. It's called Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life. And proud of that book. I like the research that informs it, and once again was telling my story. But it doesn't have the word disability in it except for one time. And I realized as soon as I published the book and was in dialogue with people, both people with food allergies and people with larger issues, this was a disability story. And I needed to wrap my head around the fact that I had been living my life as a disabled person, a term that those around me wanted to protect me from and wanted to avoid me using at all costs, because I thought it would only limit my potential versus what I've found, which is that it has given me community that I desperately needed. Okay? Just skipping ahead, in my most recent collection, Made to Explode, I not only wanted to write about food allergies as disability, but I wanted it to be a kind of more political lens on disability. And I did make the kind of strategic decision to group the poems that are most directly about disability together, to have them lead off the last section. That was not the only way that the book could have been organized, but I wanted them to be received as a kind of manifesto. And I'll read a poem from this collection in a minute, but what I just would want to say before we move onwards, this is such a big conversation. I do want to talk about activism. I want to talk about disclosure. I want to talk about the opportunities I lost because of food allergies. I want to talk about the advantages I gained as a person, because I am exactly who I am, and I would not take a cure if you offered me one. But I will, before I read from Made to Explode, just say that in the work I'm doing now that I've understood more deeply and embraced the term of disability, I'm also trying to write pieces where when I'm asked to contribute something, and let's be honest, I know it is in part because of that affiliation, I want to be able to write pieces that are not centering that disclosure, centering that relationship over and over. So, for example, I'm working with a collection of essays that I know is entirely framed by my experience with allergies and disabilities. But that's true even in the essays where there is no reaction. There is no focus on food. Or it's a focus on food in disordered eating, but not in terms of anaphylaxis. Or it's a focus on my relationship with my mother, who in many ways the caregiving dynamic profoundly changed it, even though, again, food and food allergies maybe not in the picture, but they are for me disability narratives. And that's a big question for me, is now that I finally figured out how to center it, how do I decenter it all over again, but from a more informed way. This poem is called Death by Chocolate. It absolutely does critique the book of someone who probably walks around this conference sometimes. That's okay, I can live with that. It's thinking about the ways in which food allergies is often used as a plot device, a way of kind of introducing tension or setting up some ways. Among other things, allergy gets grabbed as metaphor, gets grabbed as comic device. Yeah. Thanks again for having me today. Death by chocolate. A man wants my take on his novel, where a wife dies with a peanut in her mouth after we've met her husband in the act with his secretary in the passenger seat of his late life convertible. A man wants my take on his novel, where the husband's marital issues are solved by her anaphylactic collapse after he serves her takeout, spiked with a cashew. And for another 300 pages, he wonders, was it an accident or did I know? Somewhere out there is a man. He's writing a novel about a chef with a taste for adding shrimp paste to curry, and his unsuspecting shellfish allergic wife, and I will be asked for my take on it. I have been offered dozens of takes on my own death. Suggestions abound. Death by ice cream, death by cake, death by cucumber, though that would take a while, perhaps gazpacho as a shortcut. Death by mango, death by Spanish omelet, death by dairy, an abstraction sexy to someone who has never side-eyed cream brought out slopping toward the coffee, who has never felt histamine's palm at her throat, who tells me cheese makes life worth living. These wives, I get you. Women who did not grow up aspiring to be a plot device. We almost die a lot, or we die a lot. Almost. We're over it. Our mouths have more to say.
Thank you, Sandra. And next up will be, and I forgot to mention before, please raise your hand. We have handouts with those poems in them. If you need a copy, please raise your hand and somebody will bring you a copy of that handout. It's about 7 pages long. So next up is Rosebud Bin Ani.
So thank you again to everyone who, that's me. I thought that was, I don't know what I thought that was. Sorry. Thank you so much to AWP and to you for bringing us all together. Yesterday I spoke at a panel and I realized, that one way to deal with the pandemic, whether you identify as disabled or not, is to take something that has traumatized you and wrap it in something you love. And I say this because in 2020, many terrible things happened to me. I was sexually assaulted, I had a major flare-up, and I lost parts of my memory. Unfortunately, I also gained parts of my memory that included some serious abuse as a child. And I thought, well, how do I push through? Well, you all know the answer to that. The unsolved problems of theoretical physics. That's a joke. I'm not being serious. So my point is, you wrap something that is traumatizing you or causing you pain, misery, and you wrap that in something you love. And so for me, having this recall of something that I really wanted to forget, for me was a blessing, and it's changed the way I've written. And so this is called Night Call, Stars Who Shine Less Brightly After Eating a Planet. And my physicist friends are proud of that title because, as they say, it's scientifically correct. Night call your tides the red, giants butchered, fish in shallows and gulls fought over skunned scraps their cries, still twist and tweeze, night calling requiem of scales and guts, corroded nails you'd dug up in sand. Soft, mealy rust struck fingertips, stunned your lips, froze and fixed tongues and fisheries heavy-gloved, and eye urgency bumped as if you weren't fresh catch. Tuna and hake and mackerel, and manta too, stripped. from calling dried up, weazened under them, those giants spit fire, spun angels fallen in night call to seize because they scunned and dimmed, grew horns and spinned, tails to swim alone most of their lives, without bite or injurious knot, fins but night calls naked and torn, flight flung mouth a nil and nix, surviving basest of elements you emptied, glitch, shelled, burst when he first made you eat them. Call now the urgent look, roguing your eye, scuns upward, rollers wrecking by, ear deep in night, burns into feet and groin, and please, boring worn help with spindling claws, me, is calling the smallest red giant ever seen, fighting rough ways and falling to knees, pick it up, gently. Young gull, dull bones and fuzz and debris, stay home and keep it warm between bra and, please, sock and shredded ribbon, look after it until coarse and vermilion. Can't tell any one. Shame is scunned, and this love he shows, you stop bathing. Loose, please, and hems unravel to trunk and knees. Hush, help when little red giant eats alive and me. Shrinks and jetson when he sticks us in a rusty can and don't, strikes through feed. Sea fills with shrunken and dull divinities. Port of call next. Night sings distant fishermen see you. Not wash up after being pulled. Apart, no. One will, I'm scour and wrench. I'm the water. I'm leaving your lungs. Not one, he promises, will see. I'm a body disappearing. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the first of our two virtual visitors. This is Jen Javon. Is she up on the screen? Hello, Jen. All right.
Hey,
There
can
you
you
go.
can you see me and hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm Jen Gavon, and I'm going to lower my sound on my computer because I'm hearing a feedback that. Just give me 1 second. Thank you. So I have several chronic illnesses that many of which I've had most of my life. Since I was a little girl, I was sick all the time with stomach aches. And it was kind of just like a joke in the family that like my mom had stomach aches and I had stomach aches. And it was really not paid attention to in the way that it should have been. And it just was a part of who I was, but I didn't ever know that up until about 2 or 3 years ago, that IBS is now, and I don't know how long it has been considered a disability. I know that my entire life has had to be built around the fact that I am sick to my stomach all the time, no matter what I eat or don't. And so it showed up in my writing again because I had no idea that that there was a community, and that there was support. It was just something that I felt sort of isolated and alone in dealing with. And so I went to the page, and that's where I wrote what it would like to live in a body that was, constantly felt like under attack or attacking itself, especially in my stomach area. And so I built a poetics around this idea of going into the underbelly and pulling up the the sludge, I guess is how I think of it, and dredging that up onto the page. And so my entire process of how I write has been very closely aligned to the physicality of what I experience. And then as I've gotten older, and when I when I went through puberty, and then when I gave birth to my daughter, I'd had infertility because I also have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and fibromyalgia, which appeared at the time that I was pregnant with and gave birth to my daughter. And also now I know I have Hashimoto's, a thyroid condition as well. And so the myriad experiences that I have with these illnesses, that I didn't know necessarily, were considered a disability, and that there were resources for me. And when the pandemic hit, and I would before the pandemic, I often couldn't participate in events, and there were opportunities that I was awarded, but that I then, because I could not participate because I was sick, were then taken away from me, in essence, because if I couldn't be there physically, then I couldn't participate. And there were several heartbreaking instances of that. And so when the pandemic hit and everything was virtual, it was like, oh my goodness, finally now, I can participate even when I'm sick because there's a bathroom right there, and like right next door to me. I mean, I'm pointing to my own bathroom, which is like an extension of me. And so I didn't write about it in an overt way in my writing up until recently, in just the past few years. Before that, it's always come out as the abject in a kind of a sci-fi, speculative fiction, horror, body horror kind of way. And so I always felt like I was able to consider how living with IBS has affected me, but without the shame that I grew up with around it, because it was made into a kind of a joke. And so I became very ashamed of my body as a result. So I want to share. And then one more thing. With my hormone issues, I have quite a bit of brain fog. And, again, my mom had this and still does. And it was a joke in the family. People would make fun of her for losing her words. And so then when I began to experience the same as an adult, as a writer, and it became, again, a source of shame. But then during the pandemic, other people were then experiencing brain fog as a result of long COVID. And it became something that people would just talk about. And so I finally felt empowered to express that I don't have words right now. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Janine and AWP and everyone for this space. I think this might be the first time that I'm publicly speaking about this in this particular way. So thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to read a piece from my newest collection, Belly to the Brutal. And this is just an excerpt from a longer poem. It's called I Am Fat, and when you read this poem, you will be too. Dear hearts, I will call you dear, for that is what my mother called me. When you take my hand this early winter, the leaves have mushed to rot too soon, and the creatures of the land must find some burrowing place. Please see me as I have seen myself, a woman brown and fat and displeasing, dissatisfied, and when you step into my home, you need not wipe your feet, but please don't call this a confessional box. For you, dear heart, are guest, and you are welcome. I will feed, though I will not clean, not the slushy mud from the dog's paws, not the coffee and blood staining all my once best dresses, nor the milk, nor the yard where the pumpkins never grew. And then the poem goes on to explain what it's like to have lived in a body that I've shared with you. And I'm going to read one more section from this poem. Develop a stomach condition that allows you only 700 calories a day for a year, till a scalpel and a string peel back from you the thing keeping you sick. During that year, Bask in strangers' sudden approval, smiles even, flirting, lewd messages in your inbox. Stop basking. Stop pretending not even a small part of you feels satisfied that now you can be a part of the Me Too you were never invited to before when you were fat. Though you long for wholeness, the narrative comes out disjointed like your fatness. Now that you've starved to thinness, develop ulcers and incessant heartburn despite the Tums and Tums. Never sleep for the acid at your throat. Remember the taste of food, how it coats, how it comforts. Begin to eat again and again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Jen. And now our last participant from virtual is Paul Guest. There he is. Hi, Paul. And
Hi, Janine.
can you hear us? Okay, good. All right. Well, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Janine, and thank you, AWP, for allowing us to be here remotely. When I was 12 years old, I broke my neck in a bicycle accident and injured my spinal cord. It left me a quadriplegic, and ever since then, I think I started writing poems when I was when I was 17. So about 5 years after my accident. And from about 17 until maybe when I was in graduate school, I really didn't write about my disability. I felt like, some of us have touched upon a reluctance to do that for whatever reasons. And in my case, it wasn't because I was necessarily uncomfortable with that fact about my life. It was just because I wasn't interested in it, I think, aesthetically, artistically. And maybe that's just a way of saying I didn't know how to do it in a way um, that would be interesting to me. Because I always think about the dictum in poetry that poetry should be play. I feel like poetry is a form of entertainment. You should have fun. It should be meaningful. It should be deep. It should have much more to say about the world and about the self, of course. But at the end of the day, I want it to be enjoyable to me. I want it to be enjoyable to the reader. And so I think about my reluctance to write about my body, about disability, was just like I said, I think I didn't know how to bring that same sense of urgency to it. For me, it was just like bare facts about my life. I didn't really find it aesthetically moving or interesting or engaging until I was in graduate school, and the poet Lou Schifrillo, a poet from the Pacific Northwest, so it's appropriate here in Seattle. She was my graduate workshop teacher. She herself was going through the first stages of a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, and I think she was beginning to think about how to engage that subject matter in her own work. And so one day in class, she asked me why I never wrote. I think I had a poem or something that maybe mentioned shaving or something like that. And in the poem, I didn't address at all the fact that it was somebody else who was shaving me, and because I can't do it myself. And she asked me why that was, and I didn't have a good answer. So she gave me a challenge. She said that I should try to write about it, and I bristled at it. I didn't want to do it, but then what I've come to understand as a writer is that usually when you resist something, usually there's a reason for that that you should sort of embrace and challenge. And so my challenge to myself was to begin writing poems about my disability that I was going to be pleased with. And so I did. And so a few years later, I was lucky enough to win the Whiting Award. And one of the opportunities that came from that was a chance to write a memoir. And the first chapter of that memoir is basically detailing the accident that I had when I was a boy that disabled me. And that was all fine and good, but I'd never really written about it in a poem. So a couple of years ago, I decided, you know what, I've never really written about it in a poem. I'm going to try to do it now. And it's called Theories of Revenge. And this is a poem that I'm going to read for you guys today. Anyway, let me pull that up for you guys. Theories of Revenge. I think about the man who must be dead by now, and his undifferentiated son, and how they sat beside one another that morning I nearly died in their yard. I never learned his name, his hair color, where he went to church if he did, and this morning I'm thinking about the ethics of giving him a minor limp. Some old wound that healed wrong in another life, tendon that snapped in a filthy alley in San Juan in 1967. The light was different then because the sun was. Everything was. Years before my birth, years before Elvis died on the toilet, his body ruined and ruptured. And even though I grew up in Tennessee, I've never been to Graceland. There is so much in life to regret, to desire and to pain, to ignore also. There I lay in the woods of the ditch like garbage, my body harmed forever, though nobody then would really believe it, and I felt little. Some ache, but mostly nothing, a spooky lack of weight on the summer hot ground. I think there was panic in the air above me like a ghost, and I struggled to breathe. Do not move me or pick me up or touch me, I begged the old man. Something is wrong, something was wrong with the bicycle, and now inside me was something terrible and lasting and final, and I think I wanted it all to be a bad dream. The way my head fell over when they stood me up, the horror when I collapsed. There was no blood anywhere, no visible wound, just a boy in yellow surrounded by strangers. Thank you.
For reading that, and thank you for joining us virtually. I wanted to put this panel together. I was really moved by everybody's pieces. And I thought, one of the things people don't realize is people who are disabled or chronically ill, they're not just their labels, And it's not, it doesn't have to be sad, although sometimes it's sad, It's like, hey, we can also be fun. We can also be unique and weird. I like to think I'm a fun weirdo, anyway. And I think a lot of these people are fun weirdos. I don't know, probably. So I'm going to get to the question and answer part, which I just thought was important to establish who the people you were talking to were before we started that. So anyway, I'm going back to find my question, and then we'll open up to questions and answers from the audience. And once again, if you need a copy of this, please raise your hand. And again, thank you for being with us and honoring us with your time. On a Saturday, I know you're all tired. So the first question is, how do our disabled identities manifest on the level of lineation, metaphor, and pacing? What about the choice of genre? And I'll direct the question first to Rosebud.
Right. So when I had my first flare-up, it was 2012. I lost my balance in my Uncle Bolani's yard in Harlingen, Texas, which is on the U.S.-Mexican border. And his bulldog, who's huge, I think, his name was like Killer or something, I don't know. I remember that dog ran to me before it happened, and that haunted me. And when I'm writing sometimes during a flare-up, I will put periods, and other poets are like, that's such an artistic choice. And I'm like, no, when I was reading it out loud, that's the halting that I was doing. And what's really fascinating to me is that I think, I don't want to be treated like a child. And when I read my poems aloud, I feel very powerful because I just feel that, I know the poetry communities aren't perfect. There's a lot of stuff, yada, yada. But I work in different fields, and the people at Paramount were absolutely wonderful because I was having a massive flare-up when we filmed that. I couldn't see at all, especially out of my left eye. And I was looking like this, and they're like, can you not see the prompter? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And they said, you can't see, you memorized your essays. And so they kind of had to guide me, but still in one of the spots, I think it was on the Smithsonian Channel, I'm not looking at the camera. And my friend Gabby Balat, who you should all read, brilliant writer, she said, oh, artistic choice. So I think, with what Paul was saying, and Jen and both of you, I think if you're dealing with a disability, I know it takes a lot out of you, but maybe try to also make it part of the process, not just the content. Because I'll close with this. I wrote a poem called Poet Wrestling with Her Empire of Dirt, and people really loved that poem, but they didn't realize the halting was because when I wrote it, I was having a flare-up, and the poem has very little to do with chronic illness. It has to do with the Shoah, the Holocaust. And it became the process, not the content.
Thank you, Rosebud. Now, Sandra, do you want me to read the question again, or are you good?
No, it's great. I'm going to answer it two succinct ways just because I want to be able to hear what others continue to add. So one thing that I would say is that from the perspective of allergic reactions, I have, 40 some years worth now. There are certain repetitive elements, and as a writer, one of the technical challenges to me, and particularly when I'm doing book length work, is how do I find a way to write about the reactions that is fidelious, that is accurate, but is not repetitive? How do I find what is it really becomes an editing challenge. I'm going to use this language to focus on my throat in this passage. When I have a reaction in the next chapter, I'm going to use this language to focus on the swelling in my eyelids or my lips. So I think it's just worth thinking about, from the reader's perspective, trying to find ways to vary the texture of how we write about chronic or repetitive experiences as part of the medicalized body. And then the other thing I'd add is that part of the reason for me why nonfiction opened as a door was because it was an opportunity to do the research, to do the scientific, the synthesis. And I still find that there are times that I really want to write about allergy through the perspective of class, of money, of politics. For example, when Mylan drove up the price of the EpiPen far beyond out of reach because of its relative monopoly on the technology. Those are things that don't fit in poems, at least not for me. I think you could do it, but for me, I needed to move that scientific aspect to prose, and so for that sense, the theme did determine the form.
Thank you, Sandra. And I guess for myself, I think when I got MS and the aphasia started, which is the loss of words, and my breath halted more, my line breaks got weirder, the lines got longer, they started to kind of resemble my breathing problems, and the weird words that showed up in poems just, sort of happened because of my brain damage. I have little holes in my brain, that's MS. So I think that stuff comes out on the page, and maybe it has been coming out on the page the whole time. You don't realize it. Even before I realized I was talking about it, which is interesting. So I'd like to direct the question now to Jen.
I love all of these answers, and I feel like many of them do resonate with my own writing experience as well. In terms of the writing from that place in the belly that I was talking about earlier, I remember reading a prompt in Kim Adonisio's Ordinary Genius, which I love, and it's called The Pain Body. And I think that I read that early on when I was becoming a poet. And so that informed my poetics of writing from that pain body. And so what that means for me is that I go into a place in my body and write from there. And it's like when I used to be able to dance more, and I would just turn the music on and let my body express what I needed to express. I would use that as a writing tool, and I'm so glad that I have that within me, because now when I don't have words to make sense in order to communicate, I'm still able to go into that place. It's harder now. Sometimes it's just blank. There's just blackness, and I can't pull words or anything. But if I sit with it long enough, something within my body remembers, and that's what comes out onto the page. And so that's one process for me that works, and why I'm so grateful for my lifelong battle with IBS, because all of that in the pain body, it means that I've been able to write, I hope, emotionally poignant work, because it's coming from that place within me, that has been hurting all these years. The other thing is that I write both fiction and poetry, and I often can't think linearly, and in order to plot out the story. So I write mysteries, but I'm often not able to just write, sit down and write the book, because my brain is like, it's just going all over the place. And so my background in poetry helps me be able to write chapters essentially that are not linear, and then I'm able to put them together like a puzzle later. And so I think just being flexible in my process has been really helpful in allowing me to continue writing, even as it sometimes felt like my brain and my body have betrayed me. But I'm able to go back into myself, and write from the places that it hasn't betrayed me, is I think what my body is trying to say, is that it's still here, and I just need to find and adapt to new ways of writing.
Thank you, Jen. And now I'd like to direct the question to Paul.
Um, I'm thinking about the question, at least in the text of your question, Janine. We talked about how disability affects, if you will, lineation. I think about, and also genre, but I think about, I became a poet because I guess I was good at it, or I had at least an interest in it. But I also feel like, on some level, the types of poems I write and the types of poems I wrote and continue to write were in some ways not a rejection of disability, but they were obviously a reaction to it. I think that when you have a body that's disabled or a body that's chronically ill, you are obviously, understandably, consumed by the body, that you are your body. But you become in some ways very much more aware of your own mind. You live a life of the mind, because often your body is not going to live that life for you. You live it in the mind. And so for me, the poems I love best are poems that are acts of the mind, if you will, poems where so much happens. And so for my own work, I love poems that are long lined, that usually in one strophe down the page, and have a lot of velocity to them. They contain much. And so I think that's temperamentally, aesthetically, my stance, but it's also, I think, like I said, I think there's an influence of disability, that it's a way of diving into the mind.
Thank you, Paul. And just in order to get in a question and answer from the audience or two, I'm just going to do one more of the prepared questions, but I think it's an important one. How do we accommodate or resist the gaze and readings of people who are abled? And in a literary world not often built for disabled and chronically ill writers, think national book tours with stages with steps and wheelchair ramps, lots of difficult travel, residences and conferences that aren't ADA compliant, and the demands of the world of academic work, visits, and last of all, the low pay that may not cover the demands of disability. How do you think that the literary world could take steps to be more welcoming to disabled and chronically ill writers? And I'll address that to Rosebud first.
I'd love to hear other people's answers to this, because I live in New York City, which is not the most friendly to anything, but I also live in Queens, where it's the best. I cannot tell you. I've been there since 2008. I've been in New York since the 90s. And there's a lot of literary events in New York City, and usually I'm fine, but when I have a flare-up, I can be a little wobbly. My neurologist is watching this. I wore heels. They're block heels. We've been over this. Anyway, I just feel like sometimes organizers get a little defensive. I'm not going to name names, okay? They get a little defensive. And so I try to approach these people from a place of love. Like, I do most things, even those who are sort of aggressive back. Like, this is New York City. Like, this building is old. And I try to, talk to them from a place of love. do you think, perhaps you could ever hold an off-site event somewhere, right, in a different location? And it's hard. So I'd really love to hear what others have to say.
Yeah, Sandra.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I was a finalist for a residency once where I recognized the conversation in the interview real time, what I was identifying in terms of my eating needs and my allergy issues. They became intimidated, and I didn't get the opportunity. They were worried about liability. These things really do happen, and it's, how many receptions have I been at where I was there as the center of honor, and not only was nothing served that I could eat, but some of it was like the things that I was most allergic to. So then I was super hesitant to like shake people's hands for the rest of the evening. I mean, it's just these things. I can find ways to navigate on my own behalf. I'm quite adept at it. I guess what I would use my 10 seconds to say is, we gotta, if for you it is not right to disclose, okay, I'm not going to second guess anyone's decision. But the more of us who disclose and the more of us who identify as disabled and affiliate across disabilities, the rising tide lifts all boats. And I know there are people at the very high echelons of VIP writers who are disabled. And if they spoke up and if they asked as a writer that ASL and CART was included at all of their events, they would get accommodated. Right. But maybe they have a disability that doesn't have to do with hearing impairment. So they don't ask because they've got their needs covered. We got to stop doing that. We got to ask for accommodation across all of it. That's the only way that we're going to get the leverage we need. So if you have full mobility, great. But ask if your venue is going to be accessible, for those who aren't. I mean, if you're disabled, you work across the spectrum. And we're going to screw up. And there's going to be times when our needs are cutting against each other. I was just talking with someone in the book fair where I realized that the mask I'd been wearing was keeping him from understanding what I was saying because of a hearing issue. So we're going to have moments, but we got to muddle it out in real time.
I have to add something quickly to that. I'm not going to do a full answer to this question, but I remember being in a reading I was invited to in a beautiful part of Northern California, and the reading was at a stage at the bottom of a steep wooded hill. And at least 4 people at that reading were in wheelchairs, including me. So my husband, can you raise your hand, sweetie? Where are you? Over there? Raise your hand. Yeah, he's a big guy. So he carried me down in the wheelchair so I could perform, and then he carried 4 more elderly women down the same steep hill and then back up. That's the kind of thing where you're like, wow, people really didn't think about who was going to be there. And so that happens a lot. It has stopped me from going to residencies almost completely because I can't build my own fire. I can't get into a weird bed up on a ladder. I'm like, no, I can't do any of that stuff. So it's been tough. It does limit you. And how can we be better? And what you said also about accommodating other people's disabilities. I have friends who have all kinds of different disabilities, and I think, oh, am I being accommodating to them? I want to think about their needs first. All right, sorry. That was a quick aside. Okay, Jen, would you like to answer the question?
I love what Sandra said so much. I'm learning from this one, so I'm going to pass it on to Paul now.
In my lifetime as a writer, I think I've spent maybe a year or 2 applying to residencies, learning really quickly that most of them, if not all of them, are basically entirely, they may claim some sort of access, but usually they're also in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
They, in the woods at the bottom of a hill, or, on the rim of a volcano or something like that. There's something ridiculous. And so I know for a fact that those kinds of obstacles and lacks of access have harmed me, and I don't know what to do. So the thing that I chose to do in that regard to that was just not to apply anymore, because I knew that would only lead to heartbreak and heartache, and so I don't do it. I've had reading. I remember, just for a short example, I was asked to do a reading at a university one time, and as the time came, the elevator in the building had broken down, and they just canceled the reading because they were like, the elevator's not working, we'll reschedule it for next year. And I was Or they never did, actually. I think they completely forgot about it. But I also thinking at a university, you can't find somewhere else. So it's what Roosevelt was talking about, offsite venues. Like that wasn't somehow a possibility. And it was. And often it's not malicious. It's just lack of foresight. It's ignorance. It's misunderstanding. So it's a lot to go up against. And I don't know that I have any better answer.
Thank you, Paul. That's one. Also, Paul, is your blog still live?
It's exists, what was it, Blogger or whatever? I think it's owned by the Russians now or something like that. I don't know. It's not real. I have, Twitter and Facebook, but I don't do the blog anymore.
He was this great blogger. That's how we actually met a long time ago. And I remember him just telling these crazy stories about trying to go to readings, and his wheelchair was broken or stolen, or the sidewalk was broken. Just so many things. It made me think, oh yeah, that is hard when that happens. I don't even have to think about that stuff until I myself was in a wheelchair, and it really opens your mind. And I had a funny joke. It's not really funny, but somebody was saying somebody was being unkind to somebody else here at the conference and making fun of their trimmers or whatever they had. And I thought, every healthy, able-bodied person, that's temporary. So anyway, well, that is a light note to start question and answer on. So fun. See, I told you we were fun. Come on. All right. So a couple of questions. Yeah. Yeah, and you can maybe see them better than I can. So maybe, Colleen, can you pick some people?
Hi. Do you need me to come on camera or anything for anybody, or is this fine?
It's
Okay,
fine
I
for
just want to
me.
make sure it's accessible for everyone. My name's Gagne. I use they, them. This is particularly for Jennifer because you brought up that your mother had very similar issues, health issues of the tummy issues, of the brain fog. And I'm really thinking about how we write about the body, how we write about chronic illness when we live with someone who has, if not the same illness, very similar ones. That, like, just how that shapes your life. Having someone in your life who's chronically ill, and then you also living and becoming chronically ill.
So my mom didn't follow a lot of her own passions. She wanted to be a writer, and it wasn't until she took a class of mine once I had kind of established myself as a writer, and I was teaching about we were using Hemingway's Write Hard and Clear, I think, about what hurts. And so she took this class and was able for the first time ever to write about some of these issues. And it just, I don't know, it opened my eyes in so many ways. I write about epigenetics and trauma that's passed through mother-daughter, but I don't know that I've written yet about the shared disability. I think that's come through in all of my work. Everyone asks me, why do you write about mothers and daughters, like in everything that you write? And I think it is because we share this, and it's bonded us because, no, well, for so many reasons, but mostly, that we just didn't feel understood in the rest of the family, but we understood each other. And so when I started going through it, my mom was the first person that I went to about it. And I know that I was also dealing with severe mental illness. And I know that I'm here today because I had my mom. I don't really have a better answer than that. It's very emotional for me, but yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a better answer than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen, do we have time for one more question?
Hi, my name is Sarah, she, her. So in my day job, I'm a science communicator, specifically for biological sciences, and a lot of my work goes to making sure that the rhetoric we're using is empowering to communities with those with disabilities, rather than treating it like, oh, this is just like people with this disease and they should be so thankful that we should cure them, which unfortunately we do get from scientists a lot. I was wondering, how do you, as writers, this is for anybody who'd like to answer, sort of come to terms with or grapple with that, especially when you are so involved in like the medical sides of things because you have to seek treatments or deal within those communities, how you deal with that rhetoric as a writer?
I'm constantly fighting my neurologist, but she is a blessing in my life because the first doctors I saw, I had to get something called a lumbar puncture, and the resident was like so excited. That's like a first-year medical student. And he was killing me because he wasn't doing it properly. It's gory, you don't want to know. And then the attending came and he said, "She's a person." And he goes, "Oh, that's right." And it just slipped out of his mouth. And that was like another one of those defining moments where I realized your life is the life you lived before. Like, I went through some crazy times, when I was younger. I was like homeless, but I was happy. I thanked, Hashem, like God, in my prayers every Shabbat. I wasn't like unaware before I was like this. And, but that moment changed my life. And sometimes with these doctors, you just have to wrestle with them. And even though my neurologist, who is currently watching this, and yes, again, I'm wearing heels, I'm really grateful for her because she actually had to fight for me to get a treatment that is very expensive, and the insurance company was like, "We're not paying for this." And so they paid for a little bit of it, which helps. But it's largely, to be honest with you, financial. And one shout out, this is not an endorsement, but Mark Cuban is doing good things. I know he's really fighting these companies by offering Cost Plus. I use Cost Plus, and I'm just really grateful that, there's more talk about how, your doctor is just a person. They're not always right.
We actually talked about, Rosebud and I actually talked about this last night, and it was really, so I trained to be a doctor myself. I was pre-med, I have a degree in pre-med, and so when I go to these specialists, it's always with the perspective of, I know what you're doing, I understand the language. I think they always put down that I have a pleasant personality. That's in every one of my doctor's notes. I find that very weird. And I don't know what that means. Anyway, but I was thinking about one test I took. I was really young, and I was put in the spinning scanner. It was an abdominal scan. And the tech came in and said, "I can't find it, I can't find it." And she ran out of the room, left me in there. It was still spinning. And another medical person came in and said, "Oh," and then she whispered something in this person's ear. So that's not the way to address that problem. It was my kidney. I only have one kidney. It was missing. So they were like, they can't find it. And then the other one was a specialist in, I think it was neurology, was like, "We don't have statistics for people like you." And I was like, oh, shit. Excuse my language. But that language is really important when we're communicating. It's important for us as writers to talk about this stuff too, because doctors don't always know if what they're saying or doing helps or hurts. But a lot of times it hurts, So I try to always talk to my doctors, hey, I'm a human being first. I'm not just my missing organ or my immune system problem or my MS or whatever else I have wrong with me, right? We're people first. And I feel like that's something that really in the science community, as a scientist, I want that to be understood and communicated more. Yeah, anyway. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think all of us, if we know in this room, if you've had this experience, you will frequently be in dialogue with people who are quote unquote the medical experts, but in that moment you know more about your ongoing disease or syndrome or experience than they do. And I have been in situations where I've been brought in to talk to groups of nurses or talk to groups of scientists, and in my head I'm going, shouldn't you, wait, am I the one educating you in this moment? And it's, all I want to say is just that I experienced an incident last year in which I was all of a sudden acting on behalf of a family member who was in the ICU for 3 weeks. And it was helpful for me. For a moment, I was the terrified wife, and then I was like, no, I'm the person who is very comfortable with medical vocabulary, and I can use that, and I can stay in the room, and I can be present for rounds, and I can advocate. So I would just remind ourselves that although it is dislocating and kind of overwhelming, it is also a power, and it is a power that we are ultimately able to wield.
What a wonderful answer. I also think we're great people to go to in an apocalypse because we have all the drugs. We have all the drugs.
And the snacks.
And snacks. We'll have a, yeah. Any other answers? Jen, Paul? All right, I think we might be at time. We're at time. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for honoring us with your time. I've been really moved. And thank you to these wonderful panelists, to Rosebud, Sandra, Paul, Jen. Thank you all. These guys are all people that you should buy all their books. They're outside, apparently, so go get some. They're great. You have to trust me on that, but they really are. Thank you again.